The lie I told was only 2 words long. Of course, they slipped out of my mouth so easily, so smoothly, that for a moment I almost believed them myself. The words floated across the heavy mahogany table, over the perfectly seared scallops and the wilting asparagus, and landed in the space between my parents' delighted laughs. We were at Gibson's, a steakhouse in downtown Chicago where the air is thick with the smell of old money and new deals. The kind of place my family insisted on for celebrations, which usually meant an occasion to celebrate my younger sister, Chloe. Tonight was no different. The crystal glasses sweat in the dim light, and the red velvet of the booth felt like it was trying to swallow me whole. My sister Chloe, the golden child, had just made her grand announcement. She had picked a wedding date. Her hand, adorned with a diamond so large it looked like a shard of ice, was wrapped around her fiancé Derek's. She was glowing, a manufactured, blinding sort of glow that I knew from years of experience was designed to cast a shadow on everyone else. "It's October 12th, she'd said, her voice dripping with the kind of saccharine sweetness that precedes something bitter. A silence fell over the table. Not a comfortable one, but a heavy, waiting silence. My father, Richard, stopped mid-chew. My mother, Eleanor, froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. They both looked at me. My own wedding date, the one I had announced 3 months prior, the one marked in a neat, circular hand in my planner, was October 12th. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Then my father let out a short, barking laugh. "Well, isn't that something?" he said, shaking his head as if Chloe had just told the cleverest joke in the world. My mother joined in, a high, tinkling laugh that always grated on my nerves. "Oh, Chloe, you little devil," she chirped, reaching across the table to pat her daughter's hand. "What a coincidence! 2 family weddings on one day. We'll be the talk of the town." Coincidence. The word hung there, ugly and false. There are 365 days in a year. The odds of this being a coincidence were about the same as a blizzard in July. This wasn't chance. It was a calculated move, a power play. It was Chloe in her purest form. She finally turned her gaze to me, her blue eyes wide and deceptively innocent. "You're fine with that, right, Cass?" she asked, her voice a soft purr. "It's not like yours was going to be a big deal anyway." And that was the moment the 2 little words formed on my tongue. Inside my chest, a storm was brewing. Years of little cuts, of being pushed aside, of having my accomplishments minimized so Chloe's mediocrity could shine, it all swirled into a single hot point of pressure behind my eyes. I felt the familiar burn of tears threatening, the tightening in my throat, but I swallowed it all down, packing it away into that deep, quiet place inside me where I kept all the other hurts. I met her gaze. I held it. I gave her nothing. I kept my hand perfectly still on the stem of my water glass, my fingers cool against the condensation. I simply nodded once, a small, tight movement. "Of course," I said. And the relief that washed over their faces was almost more insulting than the initial act. They had expected a fight, tears, a scene. When I gave them compliance instead, they relaxed, mistaking my silence for surrender. They saw a doormat, not a dormant volcano. My father clapped his hands together. "Excellent! See, Eleanor? Cassandra understands. She's the practical one." "It makes sense, really," my mother added, already lost in the logistics. "Chloe's is the main event, naturally. Most of the family will be there. Cassandra and James can have a small, intimate thing." "Maybe you can even pop over to Chloe's reception for a bit after yours is done, Cass." The suggestion was so absurd, so utterly dismissive, that it almost made me laugh. Pop over? Like my wedding, the celebration of my commitment to the man I loved was a minor inconvenience, an appetizer before the main course of my sister's grand spectacle. I just smiled faintly and took a sip of water. The liquid was cool, but it did nothing to quench the fire in my gut. Across from me, James, my fiancé, had been silent through the whole exchange. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching near his temple. He caught my eye, a question in his gaze. "Are you really okay with this?" I gave him the smallest shake of my head, a message only he would understand. Wait. The rest of the dinner was a blur of Chloe and Derek's plans. The Grand Excelsior Hotel, a 5-course meal, a 10-piece band. My parents hung on every word, their faces glowing with pride. They were building her a monument, and they expected me to happily help lay the bricks. No one asked about my plans. No one ever did. I let their voices wash over me, the sound fading into a dull hum. My mind was already elsewhere. It was back in my quiet, orderly apartment downtown. It was focused on the navy blue leather-bound planner that sat on my desk. Inside, under the date October 12th, was a list, a guest list, a vendor list, a timeline, all written in my precise, careful script. They thought they had won. They thought they had put me back in my place, in the shadows where they were most comfortable with me being. What they didn't see, what they had never bothered to see, was that my silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of years of observation, of careful documentation, of a patience they could never comprehend. They thought this was the end of the conversation. They had no idea it was the beginning of a reckoning, and it would all happen just as they planned on October 12th. Before I go on with what happened next, I just want to say thank you for being here, for listening. Sometimes just having someone hear your side of the story is all you need. If you're here with me, could you do me a favor and just type what city you're watching from in the comments? I'd love to know how far my story is traveling. It means the world to me. The drive home from the steakhouse was quiet. The city lights of Chicago smeared across the passenger window, a watercolor of neon and gold that I barely registered. James drove, his hands tight on the steering wheel, the silence in the car a heavy blanket. He knew better than to push. He knew that when I got this quiet, I was traveling backward in time, walking through the museum of my own grievances. And he was right. My mind wasn't in the car with him. It was 24 years ago, on the sun-drenched front porch of our childhood home. I was 8 years old, holding a bright red lunchbox I had packed myself, complete with a note I'd written to my own mother. I was waiting to be noticed, but my mother, Eleanor, was on her knees, fussing with a giant satin bow on Chloe's dress. Chloe, at 4, had been chosen for a local department store ad. "Smile wider, my angel," Mom cooed, her voice a warm honey that never seemed to be directed at me. "Show them those dimples." I stood there for 10 minutes, the handle of the lunchbox growing slick in my hand until the car came to take them away. They never even looked back. I learned my first lesson then. My existence was conditional. It depended on whether or not Chloe needed an audience. The city lights blurred, and the memory shifted. I was 13, standing in our living room. It was my birthday. A large sheet cake sat on the coffee table, its white frosting glowing. In bright pink cursive, it read, "Happy birthday, Cassandra and Chloe." My birthday is in April. Chloe's is in August. "We thought it would be fun to celebrate together," Mom explained, clapping her hands together. "A half birthday for Chloe." Before I could even make a wish, Chloe, all of 9 years old, leaned over and blew out every single one of my 14 candles in one dramatic puff. The room filled with applause for her impressive lung capacity. I stood there, smoke stinging my eyes, and learned to clap along. It was easier than explaining why my own party felt like a betrayal. James took a left onto Lakeshore Drive, the dark, vast expanse of the lake to our right. The rhythmic sound of the tires on the pavement was a metronome, counting out more memories. High school. I worked relentlessly. Grades were my currency, the only way I could buy a little space for myself, a little bit of value. I remember bursting through the door, waving a chemistry final. A bright red 100 was circled at the top. My father was at the kitchen table, reading the paper. I held it out to him, beaming. "Dad, look!" He glanced at it over the top of his glasses, his expression flat. "That's nice, Cassandra," he said, his eyes already returning to the stock market report. "Just don't wave it in your sister's face. You know she's struggling in science. Don't make her feel bad." The pride I felt curdled in my stomach. I carefully folded the test paper into a neat square, hiding the red number from view, and slipped it into my pocket. That became a habit, folding up any proof that I had succeeded, making myself smaller so Chloe's shadow wouldn't seem so vast. The car hummed along. The memory that always hurt the most surfaced next. It was my senior year. There was a boy, Mark. He was quiet, smart, and had a smile that made my stomach do flip-flops. We were partners in calculus class. I had a massive crush on him. For the first time in years, I broke my own rule. I told someone something I cared about. I told Chloe. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. A week later, she started dating him. When I confronted her, my voice shaking, she just shrugged. "He asked me out. What was I supposed to do?" I cried for 3 days. When my mother found me, her response wasn't comfort. It was a cold, hard slap of reality, Harris family style. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Cassandra," she said with an exasperated sigh. "He just prefers pretty girls. You should focus on your studies." That was the night I stopped sharing my heart with any of them. I built a fortress around it, brick by careful brick. The biggest betrayal, the one that set the course for the rest of my life, came a few months later. College acceptance letters had arrived. I had been accepted to Northwestern, my dream school, with a partial scholarship. But it wasn't enough. I still needed help with tuition. I sat my parents down, my acceptance letter in hand, my heart pounding with a desperate hope. My father listened, then took a long sip of his coffee. He looked at my mother, then back at me. "Cassandra," he said, his voice laced with a weary sort of finality. "We can't. Chloe wants to go to that design school in California. The tuition is outrageous. She needs the college fund more than you do." He said it so simply, as if he were discussing the weather, as if my future, my dreams, the thing I had worked my entire life for, was just an unfortunate expense that had to be cut from the budget. My partial scholarship, my perfect grades, none of it mattered. Chloe's whim outweighed my life's work. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply folded the acceptance letter, just like I had folded that chemistry test years before, and I walked out of the room. A part of me broke that day, but in its place, something harder began to grow. I got a job as a financial analyst right out of high school, a position my old teacher helped me get. I went to community college at night, paying for every class myself, graduating with honors 2 years later. I moved out at 22. I built my own life, a quiet, orderly life, far from the chaotic drama of my family. I became successful, very successful, in my own right. And through it all, I became the family's silent ATM. A new car for Chloe when she crashed her old one, a loan for my dad's failed business venture, money for my mother's constant home renovations. I paid because it was easier than fighting. I provided because it was the only role they ever valued me in. The car finally pulled into the garage of my apartment building. James switched off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He turned to me, his face full of a deep, quiet anger on my behalf. "You're not going to let them do this to you, are you?" he asked softly. I looked out at the concrete wall of the garage, but I was seeing a lifetime of folded papers, of swallowed words, of silent screams. I thought of my apartment upstairs and the safe in my closet. Inside it, there wasn't just jewelry. There were files, neatly labeled manila folders, every check I'd ever written them, every receipt for every emergency, every email promising to pay me back. Years and years of proof. I turned to James, and for the first time that night, I let a real, genuine smile touch my lips. It felt foreign and powerful. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. Back in the sanctuary of my apartment, the city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Everything in my home was deliberate, ordered. The books on the shelves were arranged by color. The files on my desk were perfectly aligned. It was a space I had built for myself, a fortress of calm against the chaos of my family. James was making tea in the kitchen, the soft clink of ceramic a comforting sound. I kicked off my heels and sank into the soft gray sofa, the silence a welcome relief, but I knew it wouldn't last. My family operated on a timeline of their own making, one where their needs were always urgent. Right on cue, my phone, lying on the glass coffee table, buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a picture of my mother. My stomach tightened into a familiar knot. I knew this call wasn't to apologize. It was phase 2 of the operation. I let it ring twice more before answering, putting it on speaker. "Hello, Mom." "Cassandra, honey!" Her voice was artificially bright, the one she used when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. "I'm so glad I caught you. I've just been thinking." I waited. James leaned against the kitchen doorway, his arms crossed, his expression grim. "You know," she began, "since Chloe's wedding is going to be such a large affair and everyone will be there, it really would be for the best if you just moved yours. It's just easier." I stared at the phone, at the smiling picture of the woman who was supposed to protect me, who was instead asking me to erase myself for the convenience of my sister. "Easier for whom, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She laughed, a brittle sound. "For everyone, silly. It avoids all the awkwardness of people having to choose. And besides, Chloe is so stressed. She could really use your help with the planning. You're so good at all that practical stuff." Practical stuff. That's what they called my life's work. My career in finance, my ability to manage complex budgets, my meticulous planning, all relegated to practical stuff. "So let me get this straight," I said, spelling it out slowly, as if to a child. "You want me to cancel my wedding, the one I've been planning for a year, to become an unpaid assistant for my sister's wedding, which she deliberately scheduled on the same day to hurt me?" There was a pause. "Well, when you put it like that, you make it sound so ugly," she whined. "Don't be dramatic, Cassandra. You're the practical one. We've always been able to count on you to be the bigger person." The bigger person. The words echoed in my head. For them, the bigger person meant the person who would absorb any amount of disrespect and say thank you for it. It meant the person who would set herself on fire to keep them warm. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The years of accumulated hurt, of quiet resentment, didn't just overflow. They flash froze, turning from a hot, churning sea of emotion into a single, sharp, clear point of ice. The tears I expected didn't come. The rage I thought would boil over simply cooled. It settled deep in my bones, a calm, chilling certainty. The snap wasn't loud. It was a silent, internal event. It was the final, quiet click of a lock falling into place. "I have to go, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion at all. "But we haven't finished." I ended the call. I stood up and walked, not to the window to look at the city, not to the kitchen for the tea James was holding out for me, but straight to the walk-in closet in my bedroom. James followed, watching me with a confused concern. "Cass, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I knelt down, pushed aside a row of neatly organized shoes, and pulled back a false panel in the wall. Behind it was a heavy, fireproof safe. I spun the dial, the clicks sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet of the room. The heavy door swung open. It wasn't filled with glittering jewelry or stacks of cash. It was filled with paper. Manila folders, each one labeled in my precise hand. Loan to Dad, 2018. Chloe car accident, 2020. Kitchen remodel, 2022. And at the very front, a thick, navy blue folder simply labeled Evelyn, my grandmother, the only one who had ever truly seen me. I pulled out the Evelyn file. My hands were perfectly steady. The frantic, hurt person who had walked into this apartment 30 minutes ago was gone. In her place was someone else, someone colder, clearer, and far more dangerous. James knelt beside me. "What is all this?" he whispered, looking at the stack of folders. "Receipts," I said, my voice flat. "It's a lifetime of receipts." I opened the navy blue folder. On top was a thick vellum envelope sealed with wax. A letter from my grandmother, given to me by her lawyer after she passed away 5 years ago, with strict instructions not to open it until I was either 30 or in a moment of crisis. At 32, I figured this qualified. The person who always tried to earn her family's love was gone. The person who accepted scraps of affection and called it a meal was gone. I was no longer the bigger person. I was no longer the practical one. I was the one with the proof, and I was finally ready to use it. The wax seal on the envelope broke with a satisfying crack. The paper inside was thick and creamy, covered in my grandmother Evelyn's elegant looping script. She had been a force of nature, a woman who built a small real estate business into a formidable portfolio through sheer grit and intelligence. She was the matriarch of our family in every sense, and her disapproval of my parents' coddling of Chloe was a well-known, if unspoken, fact. James sat beside me on the floor, the open safe a silent testament to the years of planning I hadn't even realized I was doing. He watched me, giving me the space I needed. I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Cassandra," it began, "if you are reading this, it means the time has come. I have watched you your entire life, my quiet, observant girl. I have seen your strength, your intelligence, and your incredible capacity for loyalty, even to those who do not deserve it. I have also seen how they take that loyalty and twist it into an obligation, how they mistake your kindness for weakness. Your mother and father, I love them, but they are blind. They see Chloe's sparkle and mistake it for the sun, not realizing you are the quiet, steady gravity that keeps their entire world from flying apart. They have spent your life asking you to dim your light so your sister's flickering candle might seem brighter. I will not allow that to be your legacy. I have spent my life building something, Cassandra, not just for me, but for the future, for a future I knew would need a steady hand, your hand. Inside this folder, you will find documents for a trust I established in your name the day you were born, the Evelyn's Aegis Trust. Your parents know of a small educational fund I left you. They do not know the true extent of this. It was designed to remain dormant, managed by my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, accumulating value until you were ready. I believe you are ready now. This is not just money, my dear. It is power. The power to say no. The power to build your own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. Use it wisely. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to be happy. Do not let them make you small. Your name is Cassandra, the prophetess no one believed. It is time for you to show them the truth. With all my love, Grandma Evelyn. My vision blurred. This time, the tears came. Not tears of hurt or anger, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. She had seen me. All along, she had seen me. She had armed me for a battle she knew I would one day have to fight. Beneath the letter were the trust documents, page after page of legal jargon, financial statements, and property deeds. The numbers were staggering, far more than I could have imagined. But it wasn't just cash and stocks. It was property, commercial real estate all over Chicago. And then I saw it. A name that made the air leave my lungs in a sudden rush. A holding company, Sterling Star Properties LLC, was listed as the owner of a major downtown asset. I traced the line with a trembling finger. Asset name, the Grand Excelsior Hotel. The hotel, Chloe's wedding venue. I stared at the paper, my mind struggling to connect the dots. It couldn't be. It was too perfect, too poetic. I scrambled through the documents, my heart pounding against my ribs. There it was again, on a deed of ownership. Sterling Star Properties was the sole asset of the Evelyn's Aegis Trust. My trust. I didn't just have money. I owned the entire building, the ground beneath their feet, the roof over their heads. I was their landlord. "James," I whispered, my voice hoarse. He leaned in, his eyes wide. I just pointed at the document. I couldn't form the words. He read it, and then read it again. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. "No," he breathed. "Cass, you've got to be kidding me." "I own it," I said, the words finally coming out. The whole damn hotel. The shock gave way to a giddy, slightly hysterical laugh. We both started laughing, a release of all the tension and pain of the evening. We were two people sitting on a closet floor, surrounded by financial documents, laughing like madmen. When the laughter subsided, a cold, hard clarity took its place. This changed everything. This wasn't just a shield. It was a weapon. The next morning, I was in Mr. Harrison's office. He was an older man with kind eyes, the same lawyer who had managed my grandmother's affairs for 40 years. He greeted me with a warm smile. "Cassandra," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I have been waiting for this day for a long time. Your grandmother would be so proud." "She knew, didn't she?" I asked. "She knew they would push me to a breaking point." "Evelyn was the shrewdest person I ever met," he confirmed, folding his hands on his large oak desk. "She planned for every contingency. The trust is ironclad. You have full and sole control over all of its assets as of your 30th birthday. The hotel, the other properties, the liquid assets, it is all yours." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Harrison, I need to understand my position. My sister has booked her wedding at the Grand Excelsior on the same day as mine." "Has she now? How audacious." "I want to know my rights as the owner. What can I do?" He leaned back in his chair. "Well, legally, you could cancel her event. The contract likely has clauses that would allow the venue owner to terminate for any number of reasons. It would be messy, but possible." I shook my head. "No, I don't want to cancel it. I want it to go forward." He looked at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. All right, then your power lies in information and control. You have access to every detail of her event. The guest list, the vendors, the payments, or lack thereof. You control the staff. You control the space. The entire building is your stage, Cassandra. You are the director. You can, for instance, ensure your own event in the grand ballroom has every possible resource, while her event in the garden suite adheres strictly to the letter of her contract. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about being precise. It was about justice. There's one more thing, Mr. Harrison said, reaching into a drawer. He pulled out a single sealed envelope, identical to the one I had opened last night. Evelyn left this for me as well. It's an addendum to her will. I was instructed to read it publicly if there was ever a formal dispute regarding her inheritance or a moral failing that brought public disgrace to the family name. He tapped the envelope. She called it her dead man's hand. She believed in checks and balances. I left his office with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just hope, it was power. The quiet, steady, unshakable power that comes from knowing the truth, holding the receipts, and owning the entire board. The game hadn't changed. The real game was just beginning. That evening, I laid it all out for James. We sat at my large dining table, the city lights a glittering backdrop. The documents from the trust were spread between us, a paper trail of my newfound power. I told him everything. The full extent of the trust, the ownership of the hotel, the second letter Mr. Harrison held. He listened patiently, his architect's mind absorbing the structure of the situation. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, just looking at the papers, then at me. His expression wasn't just supportive, it was one of profound respect. My grandmother used to say, "Never start a fight, but always be prepared to finish it," I said softly. I think I finally understand what she meant. "She armed you, Cass," James said, his voice low with awe. "She gave you a fortress." He reached across the table and took my hand. "So, what's the plan? We're not just going to sit back and let this happen." "No," I said, a new confidence hardening my voice. "We're not. I don't want to cancel her wedding. That's what they'd expect. It's messy, and it would just feed their narrative that I'm jealous and vindictive. I want them to walk into their own trap. I want them to experience the consequences of their own choices in public." "Okay," he said, nodding slowly. "So we let both weddings go forward, but we make ours unforgettable." "Exactly," I said. "Chloe booked the garden suite. It's pretty, but it's small. It holds 150 people, max. I booked the grand ballroom before all this happened. It holds 500. A strategic glint appeared in his eyes. "And who is on our guest list?" That's when I told him my idea. It was audacious, and it was theatrical, and it was exactly the kind of move my grandmother would have appreciated. The next day, James arranged a meeting. It wasn't with a wedding planner. It was with his father. William Sterling was the CEO of Sterling & Associates, one of the largest and most respected architectural firms in the country. He was a man who radiated a quiet, intimidating authority. He was sharp, pragmatic, and he adored his son. We met in his corner office, which had a panoramic view of Millennium Park. I was nervous, but James's presence beside me was a steadying force. I laid out the situation for him, just as I had for James. I didn't embellish, I didn't get emotional. I presented the facts. The history of my family's financial dependence on me, the deliberate scheduling of the wedding, the discovery of my ownership of the venue. When I finished, William Sterling leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze analytical. "This is a fascinating problem, Cassandra," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "From a strategic standpoint." "Dad," James started, "I know it's a lot to ask." William held up a hand, silencing his son. He was still looking at me. "Your family, Cassandra, has made a critical business error. They have underestimated their primary investor. They have taken your emotional support for granted, but more importantly, they have taken your financial contributions for granted. They see you as a subsidiary, not as the holding company." I felt a surge of validation. He understood. He wasn't seeing it as petty family drama. He was seeing it for what it was, a breach of contract, a hostile takeover attempt on my life. "I have a proposal, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice gaining strength. "James and I would like our wedding to be more than just a family affair. We would like it to be a celebration of our professional lives as well, a networking event of sorts. We want to invite our colleagues, our mentors, and our clients." William's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of deep respect in his eyes. He understood the unspoken part of my request immediately. Chloe and Derek were trying to leverage my family connections. I was about to leverage the most powerful connections in the city, his. "My son is marrying an intelligent woman," he said, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. He leaned forward. "Let's talk about the guest list. I believe the board of directors is overdue for a celebratory gala. All of our senior partners, our top 100 clients, the press contacts we use for our major project unveilings. Would that be a sufficient start?" "That would be perfect," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "And Derek Vance," William continued, his voice hardening slightly. "His firm, Vance Capital, has been trying to land our company's new expansion project for months. They've been persistent. I believe he thinks his engagement to your sister gives him an inside track with me. He is, I believe, mistaken." A cold dread and a hot anger mixed in my stomach. So that was part of it, too. Derek wasn't just marrying my sister. He was trying to marry into a business connection. He was using me, using my wedding, as a pawn in his own career ambitions. "Let him think that," I said, my voice like ice. "Let him walk into that ballroom expecting to schmooze your clients, only to find they're there to celebrate with me." William Sterling stood up and extended his hand. "Cassandra, welcome to the family. I believe this will be a most illuminating event. My assistant will coordinate with you. Spare no expense. Consider it an early wedding gift and a sound business investment." I shook his hand, its grip firm and decisive. I had walked into that office as Cassandra Harris, the dutiful daughter. I walked out as Cassandra Sterling, to be, a woman with powerful allies and a flawlessly engineered plan. The pieces were moving into place. The invitations, printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf lettering, went out the next day. The RSVPs began to flood in almost immediately. CEOs, developers, city officials, philanthropists. The A-list of Chicago business and society. My own guest list was small, filled with the few friends who had been my true family. Combined with the Sterling list, our wedding was no longer just a wedding, it was the must-attend event of the fall season. Meanwhile, I used my owner's access to monitor the planning for the garden suite. The invoices were frequently late, the down payments were being made on Derek's credit card, which was declined twice. They were cutting corners, arguing with the vendors, trying to create an illusion of wealth they simply didn't possess. They were building a house of cards right in the middle of my fortress, and I was just waiting for the right moment to let the wind blow. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in my family's unique brand of psychological warfare. Now that the date was set in stone and my initial compliance had been secured, they moved on to Phase 3, extraction of resources. The first call came from my mother. "Cassandra, darling," she said, her voice syrupy. "Chloe is just swamped, absolutely buried in wedding details. And, well, you know how she is with money. It just slips through her fingers. We were thinking, as a wedding gift, perhaps you could cover the florist. It's only a few $1,000s." I was sitting at my desk reviewing the Q3 earnings report for my company. I swiveled in my chair and looked out at the city skyline. "Mom," I said, my tone polite but firm, "my gift for Chloe has already been arranged." "Oh? What is it?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "It's a surprise," I said. "You'll see it on the wedding day." There was a frustrated sigh on the other end of the line. "Well, fine, but your father and I think it's your duty as her sister to help her. This is the biggest day of her life." "My biggest day is also on October 12th, I reminded her gently. She clicked her tongue. "Don't be difficult, Cassandra." The calls became more frequent, more demanding. They wanted me to pay for the cake. They wanted me to lend Chloe my car for her errands. My father called once, his tone gruff, to suggest I should invest in Derek's career by giving him a substantial loan to impress his partners before the wedding. Each time I gave them a calm, polite, unshakable no. Their confusion slowly morphed into frustration, then into outright anger. They weren't used to this. The ATM was closed for business, and they didn't have the PIN. Then came the sabotage attempt. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Cassandra Harris?" a woman's voice asked. It sounded young and nervous. "This is she." "Hi, my name is Amelia. I'm your cousin." "From your Aunt Patricia's side?" I vaguely remembered Amelia, a quiet girl who was always trailing in Chloe's wake at family gatherings. "Yes, Amelia. Is everything okay?" No, it's not," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry to do this, but I had to tell you. I was with Chloe today. She was really mad. She was saying you were trying to ruin her wedding by not helping. And she and Derek, they got a copy of your vendor list. I don't know how. And they were calling them. They were pretending to be your assistant, trying to cancel your bookings. The photographer, the string quartet. My blood ran cold. It was one thing to be manipulative and greedy. It was another to actively try to destroy my wedding day out of sheer spite. "Amelia," I said, my voice sharp and focused. "Thank you. You did the right thing by calling me. Can you tell me exactly who they called?" She tearfully recounted what she had overheard. My heart pounded with a cold fury, but on the outside, I was a statue. This was the final piece of evidence I needed. This was their hubris, their fatal mistake. "Thank you, Amelia," I said again, my voice softening. "I won't forget this." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a full minute. Then I picked up the phone again. My first call was to Mrs. Davis, the head of event management at the Grand Excelsior. "Mrs. Davis," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "This is Cassandra Harris. I am the owner of this hotel. I need to inform you of a security situation. My event in the Grand Ballroom is to be placed on the highest level of alert. No changes of any kind are to be made to my bookings without my direct, in-person authorization. Furthermore, I want a log of every single communication made regarding the event in the Garden Suite, every call, every email. Is that understood?" There was a stunned silence, followed by a very quick, "Yes, Miss Harris. Of course, Miss Harris. Right away." My next calls were to the vendors themselves. They were confused. Yes, they had received a call from a Jessica, my supposed assistant, claiming there was a change of plans. I quickly and calmly corrected the record, assuring them that everything was proceeding as scheduled and apologizing for the miscommunication. I also offered each of them a significant bonus for their trouble and their discretion, cementing their loyalty. The final call of the day was to my mother. She answered on the second ring. "What is this I hear about you refusing to help your sister?" she began, her voice already raised. "Cassandra, this has gone far enough, after all we've done for you." "Stop," I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through her tirade like a shard of glass. She fell silent, shocked. "Let's talk about all you've done for me, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I pulled open a file drawer in my desk. "Let's talk about the $20,000 for Dad's sure thing investment in 2018. Let's talk about the new Mercedes for Chloe after she totaled her last one. Let's talk about my college fund, the one that paid for Chloe's interior design journey in LA for 6 months before she dropped out. I am looking at a spreadsheet right now, Mother. I've been keeping records. Do you know what the total is?" The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "Don't call me again with requests," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Don't push me. Because you have no idea how much ammunition I have. You think you know who I am, but you don't. You're all about to find out, though. I'll see you on October 12th. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The final gauntlet had been thrown. They had escalated things to a level of pettiness and malice that I hadn't thought even they were capable of. They had tried to burn my world down. They had forgotten that I was the one who owned the land, held the deed, and had a fireproof vault full of receipts. The storm was no longer coming. The storm was here. October 12th arrived on a crisp, clear autumn day. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the leaves in Lincoln Park had turned to fiery shades of crimson and gold. It was a perfect day for a wedding, or in our case, 2. I spent the morning in the presidential suite of the Grand Excelsior, a sprawling space with panoramic views of the city. The mood was calm, joyful. My closest friends were with me, a small circle of women who had been my chosen family for years. There was no drama, no hysterics, just laughter and champagne. I had given the hotel staff my instructions. They were to treat my family and Chloe's party with the utmost professionalism. They were to give them everything their contract stipulated and not one single thing more. Around noon, I got a call from Mrs. Davis, the events manager. Her voice was hushed. "Miss Harris, just to update you, the party for the garden suite is having some issues. Several of their key vendors have pulled out. It seems final payments were not made." "I see," I said calmly, as my makeup artist put the final touches on my eyeshadow. "That's unfortunate for them. Please, just continue to assist them as best you can within the bounds of their agreement." "Of course, Miss Harris," she said. I could hear the unspoken admiration in her voice. Downstairs, the contrast was beginning to take shape. The lobby of the Grand Excelsior had 2 large, elegant signs. One, pointing to the right, read, "Harris and Vance Wedding, the Garden Suite." The other, pointing to the left, toward the grand marble staircase, read, "Harris and Sterling Wedding, the Grand Ballroom." Guests began to arrive. My guests, our guests, were a sea of Chicago's elite. They were directed to the Grand Ballroom, a magnificent 2-story room with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and a wall of windows overlooking the city. A string orchestra was playing softly. Waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was a picture of elegance and power. Chloe's guests, a much smaller and more colorful crowd, were directed to the garden suite. It was a nice room, but it was on the ground floor, at the back of the hotel. Its windows looked out onto a small, manicured patch of grass. The 10-piece band they had bragged about had been replaced by a DJ with a laptop, a last-minute booking after the band's check bounced. Half their invited guests hadn't shown up, choosing to attend the more prominent Sterling wedding instead. The room, designed for 150, felt cavernously empty with only 60 people inside. Our ceremony was perfect. I walked down the aisle on the arm of William Sterling, who looked at me with a father's pride. I saw James waiting for me, and the rest of the world melted away. We said our vows, our voices clear and steady, and when he kissed me, the applause that filled the grand room was a warm, genuine wave of joy. The reception was in full swing when they arrived. I saw them first. The doors to the grand ballroom swung open, and my family stood there, silhouetted against the light of the hallway. My mother, my father, and Chloe, still in her wedding dress, with a furious-looking Derek trailing behind her. They looked like a hunting party, their faces a mixture of confusion and rage. They had clearly come from their own sad, empty reception, expecting to find me in a small room with a handful of guests. They had come to gloat, to mock, to enjoy their victory. Instead, they walked into the most exclusive event in the city. They saw the CEO of a dozen major corporations clinking champagne glasses. They saw the society columnists scribbling in their notepads. They saw a room overflowing with power, wealth, and influence, all gathered to celebrate me. They froze, their expressions shifting from arrogance to utter disbelief. The orchestra faltered for a moment as a hush began to spread through the room. Chloe's eyes scanned the crowd, wide with horror. "What is this?" she hissed to my mother, her voice a sharp, ugly whisper that carried in the sudden quiet. "Why are all my guests here?" Derek's face was pale as a sheet. He had just spotted William Sterling, his biggest potential client, standing not 10 feet away, watching him with an expression of cold contempt. "These aren't your guests," he choked out. "These are my company's clients, the entire board of Sterling and Associates." "What the hell are they doing here?" That was William Sterling's cue. He stepped forward, taking the microphone from the orchestra leader's stand. His voice, calm and powerful, filled every corner of the magnificent room. "Good evening, everyone," he began, as if this interruption was a planned part of the festivities. He smiled warmly at me and James. "On behalf of my family, I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate the union of my son, James, and my wonderful new daughter-in-law, Cassandra." He paused, then turned his gaze directly to my family, who were still frozen by the door. "It seems we have some unexpected visitors." His eyes landed on Derek. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming lethally sharp. "I believe you've been trying to secure a meeting with me for months. I'm afraid I must decline. My company does not do business with men who believe that betraying their family is a sound business strategy. Your attempt to leverage this wedding for your personal gain has been noted, as has your attempt to sabotage my daughter-in-law's vendors. Consider your proposal to my firm permanently rejected." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Derek looked like he had been physically struck. Chloe stared at him, her mouth agape. What is he talking about? William Sterling wasn't finished. He turned his attention back to the room at large. "As I was saying, we are so thrilled to be celebrating in such a beautiful venue." He then looked directly at me, a proud smile on his face. "And I am particularly honored that this event is being held in a place owned by a young woman I deeply admire, the owner of this very hotel, my new daughter-in-law, Cassandra Sterling." If the first announcement was a gasp, this one was a thunderclap of shock. The entire room erupted in murmurs. The press photographers, sensing a major story, started snapping pictures furiously, their flashes like lightning strikes. My father's face went from red to a pasty white. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Chloe just stared at me, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending horror. The practical one, the boring sister, the family doormat, owned the whole damn building. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened again. Mr. Harrison, my grandmother's lawyer, walked in. He was holding a single wax-sealed envelope. "Mr. Sterling, if I may," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. He walked to the microphone. "My name is Howard Harrison. I was the attorney for the late Evelyn Harris. Her will contained a specific addendum to be read in the event of a public action that brought disgrace to the family name. I believe this qualifies." He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. Mr. Harrison read, "To my family, should you ever forget the meaning of the word, my estate was built on integrity and hard work. Should any member of my direct lineage, namely my son Richard or his children, engage in acts of profound moral failing, deception, or cruelty that result in public humiliation, the clause of my inheritance that grants them a yearly stipend from my estate shall be rendered null and void. All funds will be immediately redirected to the Chicago Children's Charity." He folded the letter. "This document is legally binding. As the executor of the estate, I will be filing the necessary paperwork on Monday morning." That was the final blow. The money, the one thing that had insulated them, that had allowed them to live their consequence-free lives, was gone. The aftermath was pure chaos. Chloe shrieked at Derek, blaming him. Derek spat back, calling her a spoiled brat. My father was sputtering, trying to apologize to William Sterling, who simply turned his back. My mother was just weeping, a pathetic, crumbling ruin. I didn't move. I stood by James's side, my hand in his, a glass of champagne held steady. I watched them, not with triumph, not with hatred, but with a quiet, distant finality. This was the end of their story in my life. William Sterling nodded to the hotel security, who had been waiting discreetly by the doors. They moved in, calm and professional. "Sir, madam, if you'll please come with me," one of them said softly. They were escorted out, not like criminals, but like what they were, a messy, embarrassing problem that needed to be removed. As the doors swung shut behind them, sealing them out of my life, a profound silence fell over the grand ballroom. Then someone started to clap. Soon, the entire room joined in, a rising tide of applause. It wasn't for the drama. It was for me. Thank you for staying with me through that. You are an amazing and patient person. If you're still here, please do me a huge favor and like this video and just comment the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've journeyed with me this far. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you could ever know. Just comment the number 1 and then listen to how my new life began. After the doors closed behind my former family, a strange and wonderful thing happened. The tension didn't just ease, it evaporated. The orchestra, as if on cue, began to play a gentle, joyful waltz. James took my hand, spun me into his arms, and we began to dance, right there in the middle of the room. Our guests smiled, the hum of conversation returned, and the wedding became what it was always meant to be, a celebration of love, partnership, and a future filled with promise. The rest of the evening passed in a beautiful, happy blur. There were no more interruptions, no more drama, just heartfelt toasts from our friends, delicious food, and dancing until our feet ached. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly light. The immense weight of my family's expectations, their disappointments, and their endless needs had been lifted. I wasn't their daughter or their sister anymore, not in any way that mattered. I was Cassandra Sterling. I was James's wife. I was myself. The next morning, I woke up to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the curtains of our suite. James was still asleep, his breathing a quiet, steady rhythm beside me. I slipped out of bed and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy drapes. The city was laid out before me, washed clean by the morning light. It looked new. I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. For years, my life had been a reacting to Chloe's needs, to my mother's manipulations, to my father's demands. My every action was governed by their gravitational pull. Now, for the first time, I felt like my own center of gravity. Later that morning, after James had left to meet his father for brunch, I was sitting alone in the quiet of our new life, sipping a cup of coffee. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email. The sender was my cousin, Amelia. My finger hovered over the screen. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I wasn't sure I cared. But a small part of me, the part that had kept meticulous records for years, needed the final entry for the ledger. I opened it. The email was short and to the point. Cassie, I don't know if you'll read this, but I wanted to tell you what happened. It was awful. Chloe and Derek broke up right there in the hotel lobby. He called her a liability and said the wedding was the biggest mistake of his career. She threw her ring at him. Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Richard tried to intervene, but their credit cards were declined when they tried to pay for their room. They had to call Aunt Patricia to come get them. The hotel is sending them a bill for the damages to the garden suite from their argument. They're ruined, Cassie. The trust fund thing, that was everything. Dad said they're going to have to sell the house. I know they're my family, but after what they did to you, I can't even feel sorry for them. I hope you are happy. You deserve it. Amelia. I read the email twice. I felt nothing. Not joy, not pity, not even a shred of satisfaction. Just a vast, quiet distance. It was like reading a news report about a disaster in a foreign country. It was tragic, yes, but it had nothing to do with me. Their world had crumbled, but my world was just beginning. I typed a simple reply. Thank you for letting me know, Amelia. I wish you all the best. Then I created a new folder in my email archives. I titled it, Harris Family Final. I moved her email into it, and then I closed the program. I stood up and walked over to my old navy blue planner, the one that had started it all. I opened it to October 12th. Under the heading, Harris and Sterling Wedding, I took a black pen and drew a single, clean line. Completed. My grandmother was right. Power wasn't about shouting or fighting. It was about having the quiet, unshakable freedom to say no. It was the power to set a boundary. It was the power to close a door and lock it from your side. The silence they had tried to bury me in for years had become my greatest sanctuary. It wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was an earned silence. It was the sound of peace settling into its proper place. It was the sound of a life, finally and completely my own. Thank you so much for listening to my entire story. I truly, truly appreciate you. If you made it all the way to the end, you're a special kind of person, and I'd love it if you'd let me know by commenting the letter A below. Just the letter A, so I know you saw it through to the end. If you have any thoughts you want to share, please do, and be sure to check out the other stories on this channel. Thank you again.